European civilization became so strong and powerful exactly because it had systematically and deliberately maintained a pretty wide leisure class. So a lot of professional slackers or loafers, if you wish. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Now, the big question is, why did European civilization succeeded so much? Why did it spread worldwide, and arguably even somewhat beyond, the ground level, somewhat into space even, okay? And to answer this question, I want to kind of return to the running topic of recent few videos, which is intelligence and culture and thinking in general, okay? So let us remember what I've said in my video Onion of Aliens, part 3, I think, where we've discussed intelligence once more. I'll link it in the description. So in this video, I claim that intelligence is basically the ability to stop and think. And without this stopping, there is no thinking, because, well, since you're already going somewhere, you don't have time to stop and therefore think, okay? So you can't stop when you're standing next to a conveyor system and you're, on a tight schedule of some sorts, when you're working. And we're kind of slowly crawling towards my main point in this video, all right? Because then, if you're this sort of working man, if you're within some sort of process, you can't really stop, right? And think, therefore. So, because, again, if you're involved in such a system, even if you get home on supposedly your free time, ultimately your free time is only the time that the system is giving to you to prepare for the next working day, essentially, right? Something like that. It's next day at the conveyor system. So there's no time to stop and therefore no time to think. And anything that becomes profession, I would argue, as a generalization of the point I just made, quickly loses the ability of any significant change, or towards any significant change. Because significant change, or you may call it revolution, for example, requires dismantling of the existing, roughly speaking, conveyor system, and setting up some new system. And obviously people from within the system cannot do this because they're busy operating the conveyor, the system, or at least setting everything up for its operation. And therefore, dismantling this system goes directly against their duties. So, if anything, they would oppose the revolution with all of their strength, right? There is, of course, a possibility of sort of like a straight line of progress. So without stopping and thinking, just continue doing whatever you do, but with more efficiency, let's say. And this is definitely possible. So you can sort of squeeze additional efficiency from the existing system, always, almost. You can optimize the processes, you can use better materials, better people, better trained people, you might argue, etc., whatever. Like, this would not lead, though, to any fundamental change. And we're talking about, like, progress, meaning, like, qualitative progress, not just quantitative. We've increased the strength of steel beams by 10%. This is not any sort of progress, really. You're just like going very, incremental small changes. You're ultimately doing the same thing, just slightly better. This is not what I'm talking about here, and this is not how you succeed as a civilization, I would claim. If you use a slightly better bow and arrows, this is not a huge progress, like if you use firearms, that's a huge progress against bow and arrows, obviously. So yeah, and this sort of fundamental change from bow and arrows towards firearms, or from horses to, steam engines even, it's like, it's not a straight line, you might notice. It's like always like beyond the corner, if you know what I mean. Like, if we keep, enhancing our bow and arrows or our horses, we go in a straight line, but we'll miss this turn, we'll miss this corner, beyond which there is a steam engine and a firearm, right? So yeah, this is the fundamental change. So in order to achieve this sort of fundamental progress, one has to have people who are not involved in maintaining the system, in maintaining the conveyor belt, in operating the horses and bows and arrows, right? We have to have people who are not involved in this work and are able to stop, because again, they're not at the conveyor, they're just, observing from the side. So they can, while we're moving in a straight line with our conveyor, they may stop and like turn around and see, hey, there's stuff over there beyond the corner. And, and then the other guys will say, hey, actually, there is, and let's go this way. That's how fundamental progress happens, right? This is why it happens. And this would be my big claim about European civilization specifically. So my claim is that European civilization became so strong and powerful exactly because it had systematically and deliberately maintained a pretty wide leisure class. So a lot of professional slackers or loafers, if you wish, right? And I kind of emphasize every word here. A lot, and of like almost like professional slackers and loafers. There have been always, pretty much always in Europe since the dawn of time, since history was written, in Europe there were people, and a lot of people who have been not doing a whole lot, They were just kind of chilling and they were like, contemplating life, vita contemplativa, as Nietzsche said, the life of contemplation, right? So historically, these were obviously like the Greek or Roman aristocrats, right? They obviously did have certain duties, like they had to be fighting wars, which many people somehow forget that it was the citizens who were fighting wars, right? They were performing various civil or civic, I don't know the word, duties or services. They were determining the state's policy, obviously. I mean, some of them have been, elected as whatever, like a manager of theaters or, whatever kind of duties there were, like Pontifex Maximus in Rome, you had to be like, Santa Claus, basically, the head of religious services and things like that. And the head of the calendar, by the way, etc., etc. But arguably, all of this involvement only bolstered their performance in various creative activities, at least in things like philosophy, rhetoric, and logic, because all of those things I've mentioned require these. And fighting wars, especially, generally helps to keep, good moral compass, if you know what I mean. Like without the proverbial luxury beliefs, it keeps you grounded in reality, without stupid ideas, without following stupid ideas, because, well, if you have to fight, I mean, it's literally life and death situation. So all of stupid ideas quickly go out of the window, men and women are equal, Okay, we're in a war. Okay, let's send our women to war, huh? A great idea. We're equal. I mean, aren't we? Huh? Great. You do that and you lose the war. Because, think for yourselves, guys. Like, I cannot say it on YouTube, I think. Yeah. So, to a degree, you might argue, but to a smaller degree, I would argue, the same thing happened in any advanced civilization in the past. I mean, you may think of Egypt or Babylon or, India maybe. I mean, this is more doubtful, but still could be the case. So they've had a pretty wide priesthood, which was this sort of leisure class. But apparently, again, if you're asking me, like, why weren't like the Babylon and Egypt and India became like the worldwide civilizations with like the super modern kind of progress? I think it's because this leisure class of theirs, this priesthood, was super self-contained, basically. Whereas in Greece and Rome, it was kind of the bulk of the, not the bulk in terms of numbers, perhaps, but, kind of the main thing of the society was the leisure class, actually, the citizens, I mean. Again, numerically, they were outnumbered probably by the slaves and non-citizens, especially in places like Sparta. Again, Sparta wasn't really that developed in this sense. But anyways, you get the idea, hopefully. But that's a whole separate discussion in the first place. So I'm kind of dismissing it for now, at least. Maybe I'll make some other video I don't know, years later about this topic, or maybe ask me questions in the comments. That's always welcome. So yeah, so apparently the self-contained priesthood of Babylon and Egypt, etc., was not able to propel like their whole civilization forward, just because again they were self-contained. So the knowledge didn't spread too much outwards. All right. Like the priests knew what was beyond the corner, but the general population did not. All right. So once again, I repeat my point that Europe was able to become the worldwide civilization, and America, by the way, is just an offshoot of European civilization, exactly because it was systematically, I repeat, systematically appreciating laziness, if you wish. So you may say it's not good, but that would be another point. Why you may say it's not good? Well, because again, historically it required a lot of bad stuff, arguably bad stuff. Again, this is a moral judgment. For example, slavery, right? So these citizens were only able to kind of sit on their asses in their senates and stuff because slaves were doing all the work for them, right? But again, that's a separate story. My point is simple and doesn't contain any moral judgments. Again, my point is Europe has become the worldwide civilization because it had a widespread leisure class, period. Like, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying you should repeat this, I'm not saying you should not repeat this, I'm not discussing the methods, I'm just kind of observing and stating what's factual, or at least I think what is factual. You may argue against it if you wish. Of course, we may formulate a hypothesis if we like. For example, like if you want to become the strongest civilization in the world, etc., etc., you would have to treat some of your people not like the other people of yours. So some people, the leisure class, would have to be allowed almost full-time laziness, if you wish, vita contemplativa, and some of them, of course, I mean, the hypothesis stopped it, period. So some of them, of course, would kind of degenerate. I mean, they would not, especially if you give people today, like, total freedom, total laziness. Like, probably the majority of them would degenerate pretty quickly, right? Because, again, well, one of the reasons is that we're not fighting wars anymore, so nothing is keeping people from degenerating, right? There is no moral compass. There's no necessity for one. So that's why people would degenerate. They would start abusing substances. They would start doing weird stuff, and probably bad stuff would happen to them. So arguably, again, this is a moral statement, but arguably, I mean, I can see arguments in favor of the position that keeping people like that working is actually beneficial for them, even though this work might not be productive for society as a whole. So it's just for them to keep themselves from destroying themselves, you know, kind of this bullshit jobs idea, right, by whoever it was. I've mentioned him already, but whatever, just Google bullshit job. Not Google, by the way, search, web search. Do a web search for bullshit jobs. Anyways, yeah, so today we have a big factor, a big destructive factor that these other civilizations of old didn't have, which is the internet. So you can almost like completely dissolve, you know, in web surfing. So yeah, that's a huge factor. That's a big external pressure. So basically, if you allow such a class to exist today, like, once again, I'm pretty convinced that the absolute majority of this class would completely degenerate, once again. Whereas the minority, the people who would have some sort of internal reasons, internal motivation to not succumb to these new external pressures, they would probably do a whole lot of great stuff. I think, with today's technology, with today's possibilities, yo, that would be something else. That would be something else. However, I think that it's not even a necessity to do anything towards this. I actually think that modern Europe does this, what I've just mentioned. Curiously enough, though, I don't think America or China or any other place is doing this. I think only Europe does this still. you know, after the ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I think Europe has always been doing this. And that's why Europe is always the cultural center of this planet. Like, you may disagree with me, but I don't really care. I mean, you may tell me that, oh, you know, these Aborigines on whatever island, they have such a great culture. Oh, yeah, baby. Talk to me about it. Yeah. Yes. So, anyways, and that's yet another reason why I keep saying that Europe would rule the world in the second half of this century. Again, watch my other videos, for example. I think one of them is actually called How or Why Europe Will Rule the World, whatever. I'll link some of them in the description as well. So yeah, leisure class. That's how you beat the world, essentially. That's how you become the strongest civ. Somehow Sid Meier did not take account of this, but progress is not possible without this. That would be my big claim. It's a hypothesis, but this is what history shows us. There have been only one worldwide civilization, at least the one we are aware of, and this is the European one, and this is how it have beaten the others, is my claim, is by having basically a whole class of slackers or loafers. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.